Hello and welcome back, and today kickstarts a large 7 or 8 part series of videos where I want to get real deep into Synology's DSM and QNAP's QTS platform. Whenever you're buying a brand new NAS, you're probably going to find, if it's a desktop or even a rack mount solution, that QNAP and Synology are two names that crop up a hell of a lot. Both of these brands have got very different attitudes to their own systems, their own software and their own hardware, and all too often, the way you work will be what makes you choose between them. Don't get me wrong, there's things like support and warranty and worldwide availability and indeed the hardware itself that will play their part. But the way you interact with your data and your individual skill set, the size of your team if you're an individual user or a business, may largely dictate the NAS brand for you. So what we're going to be doing is going through a series of videos, each one dedicated to a different kind of file type and system utilization. And then I'm going to show you guys exactly how both NAS brands have approached this in their graphical user interface and NAS software. And now on the left hand side here we have got the QNAP system, QTS, and we're using the brand new 53D series NAS. We're using the 6 bay, but the hardware is largely the same across the 2, the 4 and the 6 bay, and I have upgraded the memory to the maximum 8 gig for this series of videos because we're going to be running all manner of applications. If we look at the Synology, we can see that we're going to be utilizing the brand new Synology DS920, one of the latest generation of the 20 plus series of NAS, and I've upgraded that memory to 8 gig, and both of these NASs have got the same Intel Celeron J125 CPU. So the result is I'm trying to keep a nice balanced environment between them where appropriate. Before we go any further though, in every single video I am going to list this number of disclaimers, but I'll probably go into a little bit more detail on this first part. These are the things we have to bear in mind throughout this test. First and foremost, we are using screen recording software. We're using OBS, as you can see here on screen, and OBS does take its toll on the system resources on the PC I'm recording with today. Consequently, it's worth highlighting that this may well impact how the system is being utilized. As you see there, this is the task manager on my local PC, and OBS is using a significant chunk of GPU along with Chrome the browser, utilizing a lot of memory and CPU along with OBS itself. So it's worth highlighting that this may lead to the occasional lag when doing certain graphical implementations. Secondly, I am utilizing half screens here. Rather than try to flick between each window, I've half screened QTS on the left and DSM on the right. Consequently, things are a little zoomed out, so they may seem a little less clear. If we full screened it, things would be a lot clearer. We could zoom in, but because we want to maintain as much balance side by side here, the result is that I'm running a setup where these are side by side. Next, we are utilizing the same network for both of these devices. I am using a 1 GBE network on both of these devices, and that 1 GBE network is connecting from 1 GB on this PC to each of these NASs. So there may be times when I'm running the same process on either NAS where my network card of this PC, my 1 GBE NIC, might have a little bit of difficulty. Next, again, as mentioned, we're using 8 gig of memory, but bear in mind your system may not have 8 gig of memory, and this will occasionally take its toll on the things that we're doing. So do bear in mind that you may want to upgrade your memory if you want to do all of the tasks that we're going to be going through in today's video. Case in point, you can see here that both of these NASs are utilizing around about 1.5 to 1 to 2 gig of memory, a little bit more utilization on the QNAP because I am running more tasks overall. If we go to the memory counter there, as you can see, the Synology is using 1.1 with some background buffer cache, and the QNAP is utilizing a little bit more there because I'm running a few other applications there. Container Station, Hybrid Backup has some jobs, and Koi Meter, which is a screen share application. Consequently, that's how that extra memory is being consumed. And finally, last point, you may hear background clicks and whirs like my keyboard or my mouse. Unfortunately, there's not a lot I can do about that. I'm in quite close proximity with the system here, so consequently, it's very hard for me to limit those noises. So they will be throughout this. I'll try and remove them in post, but they're probably going to be in it. And again, I know this is a huge amount of disclaimer for a video, but I will limit this disclaimer in future parts of this video series to just a little pop-up on the screen and lightly mention it. And lastly, this is all happening over the network. There is no internet connectivity between my client machine and the NASes. There is an internet access for both of these NASes, but everything I'm doing today on the PC is over the network, so do bear that in mind. But that's been an incredibly long intro. Let's go back into these devices. As mentioned, we are looking at the main graphical user interface that you will see on your web browser if you're utilizing QTS on a 53D or indeed any QNAP NAS, and DSM on the 920 or indeed mostly any Intel Synology NAS. To access these graphical user interfaces, I would recommend downloading QFinder for the QNAP platform. We minimize that there. No, we can't. Oh, we can a bit. Use QFinder there from QNAP. If we pop that there. And in the case of the Synology, we are utilizing Synology Assistant Manager. These are the two tools that are completely for free from both platforms. There's loads of client apps for PC and Mac platforms, but these allow you to scan your local area network and find NASes there. Now, these tools allow you to do a lot of things. And as mentioned at the top of the video, today's video is about the graphical user interface, control management, users, and general access. In the next series, we'll talk about file access, but for now, this is mainly about the user interface that you guys will be using. So, from these two respective client applications for PC and Mac systems, there's a number of things you can do. You can configure the NASes individually on screen, so there's a lot more options built into QFinder on the QNAP platform. As you can see here, there's a lot of access control that you can get to the NAS. Each one will require you to log in with your details, but for example, one consistent thread across both of them is mapping a network drive. So both of these tools allow you to add a mapped network drive to your local area environment, and what that will be is a folder on your NAS that is also synchronized on your local PC system. Now, it's worth highlighting, such as QSync and Synology Drive, there are alternative ways to do this, but I'm going to save that for the file management video. But both of these tools allow you to map a network drive very easily, and again, I'll go into more detail in part 2. These tools will allow you to find the NAS on your local area network, or you can connect internet-based NASes as well using these systems here to these, and they'll be listed accordingly. Now, there are a few extras on either one of them. Obviously, the QNAP there seemingly has a lot more options of configuration on a local platform there. The Synology does have a lovely little tool built into the background. So if we go into the settings of this NAS, we'll go into the general settings. We log into this QNAP NAS here. And while we do that, we can have a look at the Synology option. Now, there's less options here on the Synology tool, but if we click the configuration option, we can enable this extra little option here for memory testing. And that allows us to consistently check the memory on NASes in this device. It may not seem like much, but it's a nice little option that's built in with the Synology Assistant Finder. On the QNAP side, as mentioned, there's a lot more configuration open to you remotely. Now, whether you like that or not, again, will come down to you, the individual user. You can even go as far as to change network IPs quite easily here on the QNAP. And on the Synology, if you do have difficulty finding the device, or it's moved on the network, and therefore it's having difficulty connecting, then extra options will appear. Next, we can move on to the browser-based graphical user interface themselves. It's worth highlighting both of these applications. The QNAP QTS and Synology DSM have mobile apps as well. I'm saving that for another part in the series. But this is what you will see when logging into the device with an admin account via your web browser on both respective platforms. Both of them have got the standard option there at the top to allow you to browse all the applications. As you can see there, all the QNAP ones are there, all the Synology ones are there. If you like, you can drag and drop these onto the desktop and create your own desktop there. On the case of the QNAP, it will add them gradually over time, or you can drag and drop them on just as easily. So if we drag and drop Hyperdata Protector, drag and drop it there, it's nice and straightforward. You can change the background if you want. There's lots of options for personalization on both of these devices. And if we head into the control panel, we can see one of the first big ways in which these two platforms are very different. Now, as mentioned before in previous videos, the Synology platform for me is the one that's far, far more user-friendly. Now, I use words like far. Far isn't the right word. It's about breadth and depth, because the QNAP gives you a lot more configuration options straight off the bat, whereas the Synology puts it behind these icons. It's worth highlighting that when you first open this, it will actually open in basic mode, where only these options will be shown. You have to head up here to advanced mode to show these other options, and this is going to be a consistent trend throughout the Synology user experience. Synology likes everything to be nice and simple as possible and wants to limit friction. Consequently, in order to maintain a safe balance that way, they hide a lot of harder information and harder choices in the background. You can find them if you dig, but they will not be readily apparent off the bat. It reminds me of when Windows XP was when Windows XP became Vista, became 7, became 10. With each iteration, the control panel became more and more simplistic. Case in point, look at this PC here. If we go into the control panel option, I've still got the small icon view, but by default, control panel on a Windows PC switches to those simple options and you have to dig. I like having the icons. And as they move through different iterations of Windows, so did the way people interact with their devices. Now, both systems have very, very similar options, but it's worth highlighting once again there are more configuration options readily available on the QNAP. For example, if we go into the general settings option there, we can look at changing everything from the time to the region, information with regard to the background. We can go in a lot more detail about the storage, but we'll save that for the next area. Change security settings, go through power options, and there's lots of options all the way along being configured in this manner. Now, this may seem a little intimidating to some users who are more used to the kind of click button approach that a lot of modern devices have. It is overly simplistic for some, but in the case of the Synology platform, that is what they've gone for. And for example, if we go into the configuration options here, we go to the information center and compare that with the hardware center on the QNAP. The QNAP has got information with regard to configurations of connected devices, and going down we can find out more about the system information as well and see how they compare. Now again, similar but still more information readily apparent on the QNAP and more configuration options readily available. Same goes for configurations of things like the network. If you want to configure a network on your Synology NAS, this is your options readily apparent to you. You've got options for external access, and if you go to the main network access tab, you look at some of the ways in which you can configure your user interface. Whereas the QNAP has got a whole dedicated app for that in the network and virtual switch tool available here. Now again, much like the Synology, there is a switch between easy and advanced, but the QNAP option just seems to have more configuration readily available. It's more graphical, there's more details, and a more tech-savvy user will almost certainly prefer this user interface. Everything's very, very similar, but the QNAP has a lot more configuration options that you might want to take advantage of. Now, if we look at creating storage, that's another area where both brands have gone a different direction. If we look at the storage manager here on the Synology and compare it with the QNAP on the left, I'll have to make these windows a bit bigger because again we are utilizing half screens here, you'll see that the Synology does seemingly have a much more simple, clean user interface. But with that, a lot of information is hidden. And depending on you, the user, you may prefer to have a lot more configuration, or what you want is simplistic overviews. So, for example, if we look at the hard drive and SSD area, we can look how both systems have approached how we see our drive media. The Synology on the right shows us the two drives that we've got inside. They're in a RAID environment, those Seagate Iron Wolf drives. And in the case of the QNAP, which I've put more drives inside, but only for other tests, we can see that from here, we can find out a little bit more information readily about each of those drives, and you can get a lot more background information too. We can find out more about RAID groups by going to the storage and snapshot areas. of both respective platforms, and from here find out more about your storage pool and the volumes that live on that storage area. Both of them have got very similar systems built into them for things like hot spares and SSD caching, but it's worth saying that although the Synology has the more simple user interface, the QNAP has way more selective options built into the background, and the same goes for migrating external storage as well. Now, let's be fair about this. We are looking at DSM 6.2. DSM 7, coming at the end of 2020, has considerably more synchronization and cloud migration options being built in, as well as improved caching tools being built into DSM 7 as well. So right now we're comparing DSM 6.2 to QTS 4.4.2, but things may change by the end of 2020. Now, both of these graphical user interfaces allow you to create multiple users, and on that score, they're very similar indeed. Both of them allow you to create individual single users and groups, but you can also create batches of groups or import existing databases of users. Case in point, to create a brand new user on both of these platforms, we can see here, they both have create at the top there. They let you both create users, they both let you import individual users, and the Synology has the configuration options built in at the top, whereas the QNAP shows you all the users and allows admin users to change their credentials. So if we create an individual user on both of these platforms, let's see how they compare. Now again, we still have that limitation here of the screen being halved, so that does make all the difference. So for the case of the Synology, the QNAP, if we create a user just called QNAP, and on the Synology, a user called Synology, we can give them a username. Give them password on both of them. And again, we can scroll down, and in the case of the Synology, it talks us through each step one by one. Do we want them to be part of a group? Do we want them to have access to certain files and folders on the NAS? Let's say we give them access to the shared folder there. We can say what their quota for storage on individual folders is, and which applications that user can access. Say that app there. If we want them to have a network speed limit, and then click apply, and now we've created that new user. And then we can overview that user there on the list on the Synology DS920. There is our user, 920. And from there we can edit that user if we choose, and you can add a little bit of information there. You can add configuration options and change it remotely as an admin. In the case of the QNAP, there's a few more options. Once again, as you would expect, first and foremost, you can upload pictures to individual users for their user account. You can add a phone number, you can add an email if you want there to be notifications from apps and system authentication. You can create the user in this one window without going through the individual steps, or configure each option as you find it appropriate. Create a new group on the fly, or add it to an existing group, like so. I've now made this user an admin, or list the folders they're allowed to access, as well as the applications they can access too. It's as straightforward as that. And it's also worth highlighting that the QNAP will not let you create a user without a password that is at least ranked fair in difficulty. So if we let the QNAP create that user, we can see that that new user QNAP has been created, and we can configure them utilizing those options there. But one extra option the QNAP has that the Synology seemingly doesn't is batch users. You can, copy a user quite easily and create a duplicate of that user if you so choose. But what the QNAP also includes is the ability to create batches of users. So if you've got a bunch of people who are temporary on your team, you can call them temp, start them at 1, end them at 5, give them the same password but allow them to change their password later. Click next, go through the options, not dissimilar to that of the Synology setup, and then boom, we've now created those temp users. It's that straightforward to create multiple users on there. And these are little configuration options that you might want that the Synology doesn't readily give you straight away at the start. However, between both of them, there's no avoiding that the Synology does have the glossier user interface. And although in some cases it will hide harder information, it does present a lot of this information in a far more readable and graphical fashion, which in 2020 a lot of users may readily want. Another example of how users have more hardcore information presented to them more readily on the QNAP is in the case of resources. So up here we have the dashboard. If we click the dashboard button there on the QNAP, it immediately gives us information on the network, the CPU, active storage, capacity being utilized, active users all connected at once. One of those is my mobile, one of those is a desktop. How different storage volumes are dealing with. If there's issues to do with storage, in my case, I've got to do some data scrubbing here from a previous video, and more. In the case of the Synology, we've got the system health information there at the bottom, and we can go from there and open up the resource monitor that we saw earlier, but that's about it. And again, you can blend it even more so just into the top if you so choose. If you like, you can open it up in a brand new window or more. And again, if you like, you can go into the resource monitor, and of course both of them have that option. But seemingly you have to go that extra step on the Synology to get that information, and even then it's presented in a less analytical manner, and this is intentional to keep things as straightforward and simple as possible, and you've got to give them props for that. One thing in the background I'm going to touch on very lightly, because this is more system dependent and less general about DSM, is the utilization of memory. Now, if we look at both of these devices, we can see how memory is utilized. Now, the Synology does an exceptional job of intelligent flushing of their data in the background, with a nice buffer zone and cache data being emptied periodically over time. But at the same time, more memory is utilized by DSM when it's available to keep things moving nice and fluid. And when you compare both user interfaces, you can see why I will often make the comparison between QNAP being more like Windows and Android, and the Synology being more like a Mac system. It's cleaner, it seems more fluid and faster. Now that speed is obviously heavily network dependent and heavily dependent on your own connected system, but there's no avoiding that these two systems have very much their own design rhetoric in mind. Now, as things happen on the device, there'll be lots of information here in the background at the top right about connected external devices, active things happening in real time, and how the system is behaving with notifications and alerts. If you go to the application center on both of these devices, you can see the range of applications you can add to both systems. How you add applications on both NAS platforms is incredibly similar, and in the case of both NAS platforms, opening up the App Center will show you a myriad of applications readily available, along with if there's updates to some of your applications, as you see there, and even beta applications readily available. The Synology has fewer applications, but they have more first-party applications, a huge degree of first-party applications, in fact. And a lot of their applications are designed to replace those that you may have in the third-party form, with Synology Drive acting as an alternative to Google Drive, and DropBox with its graphical user interface, Synology Office acting as an alternative to Office 365 and Google Docs, Synology Chat as an alternative to WhatsApp and Skype, and lots of stuff like that. The QNAP has a lot of first-party applications as well, but it has to be said that the balance between first-party and third-party is still more 50-50 when compared to the QNAP platform. There's more apps on the QNAP platform, but overall, a lot of these applications are third-party, and you will find more applications for each individual task than you will do on the Synology. But because of that, there's a slight feeling of less focus on some individual applications, which if you are looking for just one simple task to do the job and you're not looking for a configurable setup or something more bespoke, you may find the QNAP to be a little overambitious for you, or that it throws too many options at you at any given time. Once again, installing an application is incredibly straightforward. If we go to the QTS options, we can scroll down here, and as you can see, I have disabled some applications in advance of this video because I didn't want them to pop up or utilize memory without me knowing. But say for example, we scroll down and find an application to install. Let's go ahead and install the Security Counselor application on the QNAP. When installing an application on the QNAP platform, it will often ask you where in the system you want the application to be installed. If you have multiple storage areas, or perhaps have SSDs that you want to use for the main applications and hard drives for the archive storage, then it will let you choose between them. In this case, I'm going to let it install on the storage pool that I've already created. In the case of the Synology, if we scroll down and install an application as well, we'll go and install a Synology application now. For example, let's scroll down and find something fun to install. Let's install NoteStation. Now, if we click it there, it goes downloading in the background. And there you go, it will now start installing the application. And again, maybe you don't want the configuration options of knowing where they're going to install and you just want it to do it. And that's another keen example of how both brands have changed the way they approach these things. And again, that may change depending on you, the end user, and how you interact with your data systems. You can still view and enable other package sources because there are unofficial application platforms in the form of the Syno community for QNAP and QNAPclub.eu for the QNAP with loads of homebrew and custom applications, but you will have to enable settings in both of their respective tools to allow you to install those apps. So it's that straightforward to install apps, and as you install them, they will appear on their respective drop downs here, or they'll appear on the desktop depending on your own setup. Now, let's end things on how both of these systems allow you to access them remotely, because you may not be utilizing these devices on the local area network. You may be accessing them via the internet. And for that, both of these devices have their own respective means of accessing via the internet, with both of them having first-party server conduit points that you can utilize to access your NAS. In the case of the Synology, it's known as Quick Connect, and you will have to create a Quick Connect account, which you then register with your system. Once you register it, it's quite straightforward. You merely log in with your login information here that you create with Synology remotely, and we're seeing a slight lag there from the internet connectivity on my network and the fact I'm accessing it over the network, but you will connect to it there and register your Synology account and access your NAS remotely via the internet. The QNAP does very much the same thing. If you go to my QNAP cloud, I've already registered this QNAP from a previous video, and again, there's a lot more configuration options built in here. The Synology has them, but you will have to configure those options on the Synology via this tab here, or directly via the Synology Connect.to website, or one of the many other different ways in which you can access your NAS remotely. And again, it comes down to you, the user, and how you want to access your NAS. I recommend that you check out a lot of the client tools for both of these platforms, but I'm going to wrap things up now in part 1 of this series of videos. This has been the graphical user interface of the Synology DSM and QNAP QTS platforms. In our next part, we're going to talk about file management. We're going to talk about how you access files, how you search for files, and how you set up remote desktop clients so you can interact with these NASes via your own file system rather than using the web browser on either one of them. And again, this video is not about which one is better. It is about which one is better for you. And I hope this series of videos helps you decide on the right NAS platform for your home or business needs. See you on the next video. Click like if you've enjoyed this video. Click subscribe to learn more, and I'll see you next time.